Right, the vet, we had the vet out for some, early on when we were learning about the sheep, we had some veterinary interventions occasionally. And we had a new vet, and he came out and he was all set. He was ready to inoculate everybody and on and on. And I heard him make a comment to somebody, yes, yes, but they don't, something, his implication was that we don't pay any attention to the sheep, that we don't do the normal thing with the sheep, meaning inoculations and everything. And I thought, well, wait, that we don't pay any attention to the sheep. And I thought, my Lord, we pay more attention to those sheep that by not doing anything to them. We are constantly monitoring them, and we got to thinking, we hand raise those sheep. Those sheep are hand raised. And then I thought, well, we hand raise the sheep, we hand spin the wool, we hand knit, we hand wash the yarn, we hand knit the yarn into the sweater. That it's all hands on, which again goes back to Larson and putting that kind of intention into everything. And then I recently got to thinking, sure, there's a continuum, and it goes from when you breed the sheep. Those, we've got some pregnant ewes this spring, and you're monitoring them, you're giving them their prenatal vitamins, you're watching to make sure they get enough exercise at different times in gestation, they're giving them different things, and then once the baby is born, you're monitoring her or him, and it just goes on and on. It's a constant flow of intention that goes from the breeding of that sheep right down to the end of the sweater when you've got it knitted. And that's one reason we sell these sweaters only through commission, because we've maintained that continuum, and we want that energy to go right into the recipient, or the experience that the recipient has with that sweater. So we don't knit up a pile of sweaters and put them on a shelf, although there are people who do that. Instead, we invite people to have a commission, and then we will knit for that person a sweater, and that maintains the flow into the finished product. Is the concept of making sure you know exactly whom you're knitting for really evolved out of an experience I had with a knitter who was auditioning for us. I call it audition. When I'm soliciting knitters, I have them knit a baby size so that they learn the pattern and to see if they're comfortable with the production and we're both sides happy and so forth. And I had given this woman yarn to knit the pattern, and I had written down on there Sven, because the yarn had come from Sven. We have one of our best fleeces is a wether whose name is Sven, and halfway through the project she and I were discussing something, and all of a sudden she said, "You mean the person I'm knitting for is not Sven? You mean it's the sheep?" And I said, "Well, yeah, you're not knitting, you're just knitting this as an audition kind of thing." And she said, "Oh, well, I always knit for somebody. I always need to know whom I'm knitting for." And interestingly enough, a few weeks before I had that interview, I had been thinking the same thing, because always in the knitting I had done, of course, I was knitting for my grandson, I was knitting for my son, I was knitting for a friend. It's just something naturally that a hand knitter does. She doesn't sit, or he doesn't sit and just knit, usually. And this woman was adamant that she had to know whom she was knitting for. And I got to thinking, well, of course, that would be a very important part of the commission. And people may be uncomfortable with giving too much information, but at least if you've just had the name of the person, and the more information, the better. A little photograph is great, because then as the knitter is working, has in mind the recipient. And I know this is palpable because I've had that experience myself. When I was a little girl, my aunt knitted a sweater for me, and she's only 15 years older than I am, and she had knitted this little sweater for me, and of course it fit me wonderfully. I loved that sweater. I wore it all the time. And then, of course, inevitably, it got smaller and smaller and smaller till I couldn't get it on anymore, and it was almost a tragedy to me that I grew out of that sweater, because I could feel her loving intention in that sweater. So I certainly resonated with that knitter who said she really had to know whom she was knitting for.